The December 15th, 1997 edition of WWF Raw was taped on December the 9th at the Whitmore Center Arena in Durham, New Hampshire. This is, for most people, I would say, the start of the Attitude Era. Now, why I say most people? Because WWF sort of recognized this as the beginning of the Attitude Era. WWE, in this version, still uses this show as the kickoff point, if you will, of the Attitude Era. However, you could argue that there were plenty of our, things in motion before this to really get the Attitude Era going, right? Whether it's some of the interactions between Steve Austin and Vince McMahon, whether it is even just introducing the Scratch logo, like all this sort of stuff. They had already been, again, pivoting towards this new sort of edgier attitude. It's probably the best phrase to use, right? Some people thought that maybe, the Attitude Era started after Survivor Series 97, which was not long before this, with the Montreal Screwjob and all that, and how things, again, sort of took a different direction after that creatively. But as we're going to see, the Vince McMahon promo on this particular episode, I think, is why the WWF always kind of uses this as the reference point, and why I think many other people do as well. So we could argue this all day, but we will start here in our Attitude Era Rewind series and perhaps drop in a few more episodes before this to kind of give you some context of where things were headed. But for now, let's look at the December 15th, 1997 WWF Raw review. We start things off in the ring, and it is Michael Cole asking The Undertaker about his upcoming match with Shawn Michaels at the 1998 Royal Rumble. Cole brings up the stipulation that it will be a casket match, and The Undertaker says he's fought Michaels twice, and he can beat him again. Taker says he's only lost in one of these matches, referring to the casket match, and it took 10 people to put him in there. We will get to the 1994 Royal Rumble at some point in our New Generation Rewind series here on the channel. Don't miss that one, because that's going to be quite a match, I think, to review. I saw it not long ago, but that's one you don't forget, and maybe not for all the right reasons. The lights go out. Here comes Kane with Paul Bearer. Kane goes face-to-face with The Undertaker, and Paul Bearer, not to let anyone forget that The Undertaker burned his parents, and Bearer is going to give The Undertaker another opportunity to face Kane, who then slaps The Undertaker right in the face. He tries again, but Taker grabs his arm and walks away. So they're still kind of pushing that idea that Taker doesn't want this, but we know eventually he's going to have to give in when it comes to fighting his brother, Kane. All right, this is where the fun begins for me, because we get some of these video packages from this episode of Raw, and we have an advertisement for WWF The Music Volume 2. It was $14.95 on CD. Those were the days, folks. About $14.95 for the CD, featuring lots of interesting ones. This is kind of, I feel like, kind of the forgotten one. Because if you think about it, WWF The Music Volume 3, Volume 4, 5, and all the ones in there. You had the Aggression one. Those all, I think, are more memorable. But Volume 2 had some pretty good stuff on there from wrestlers in this era. So, speaking of this era, the 1-800-COLLECT Rewind looks at Brian Christopher joining his father, Jerry the King Lawler, in his feud against Taka Michinoku. And that leads us to our opening match here on this show, Jerry Lawler versus Taka Michinoku. If there's anything that says Attitude Era, Jerry Lawler versus Taka. But this is coming off the heels of Taka defeating Brian Christopher to be crowned the first light heavyweight champion at the In Your House DX show. It was 8 days before this. Jim Ross on commentary reminds us that the UFC will be in Japan on Sunday for UFC Japan featuring Frank Shamrock. The more things change, the more they stay the same. The UFC and the WWF united, perhaps, in promotion here. The difference between these two wrestlers, of course, is obvious when Taka flies onto the ropes, hits a splash onto Jerry the King Lawler on the outside in the aisle. JR also brings up that we're going to have Owen Hart giving his first really, address to Vince McMahon after the controversial situation at Survivor Series. That's one way to put it. Lawler hits the pile driver on Taka, but doesn't go for the cover. So, of course, he misses the flying punch. Taka gains the momentum, but here comes Brian Christopher to interfere for the DQ. Christopher accidentally punches Lawler, and that's that. So, further the storyline here, and not much more. All right, commentary tells us to call the hotline, and they're going to tell you a story about DX almost inciting a riot this past weekend. Would love to know all about that, but you better dish out your $1.49 for the first minute if you want all that information. All right, backstage, Hawk and Animal are coming for DX, and that's going to be our main event on this show. We get another video, and what's this an advertisement for? Here comes some nostalgia. The Jakks Action Figure Championship Series, which featured the Legion of Doom, Rocky Maivia, who now has become The Rock, the British Bulldog, Owen Hart, and The Undertaker. I think I had all of those except for The Undertaker. Really, the Legion of Doom ones really stood out, but the Owen Hart one I thought very underrated. It was a really good Owen Hart figure for that one. British Bulldog one was pretty good too. Those were awesome. The Jakks action figures. Get them while you can. I'm sure they're at a very reputable price right now out there if you still want them in this time of, many years later. So, all right, we get a video package here. Highlights of Steve Austin forfeiting the Intercontinental title to The Rock and then hitting him with a stunner. We'll get more of a recap on that coming up here in just a bit. All right, speaking of, in the ring, The Rock introduces himself as the People's Champion and the best damn Intercontinental Champion there ever was. Farouk tries to speak, but The Rock says the champ's talking, so plenty of tension at this point between The Rock and the Nation of Domination, especially Farouk. Rock orders Austin to bring him the title, and here comes Austin. He calls Rock a piece of trash. Rock's mannerisms and reactions are just incredible, as you know him to be when in these situations. Austin tells The Rock to grab a monitor because he has a surprise for him later on, and that's when Austin leaves, and Rock tells Austin he has 1 hour, to return his property to him, or the nation is coming for Steve Austin. In case you forgot what this led to, the payoff will be worth it here in just a bit. Another video advertisement. Head to shopzone.wwf.com for all the merch. This was looking about as America Online days as it gets when you look at the visuals of shopzone.wwf.com in 1997. Our next match, Dude Love versus the Road Dogg. And Jim Ross informs us that Austin has left the arena. Where is that man headed? Well, we're going to find out. This is still the period where you've got Billy Gunn kind of doing the entrance promo here, and not Road Dogg, who still only had one D in his name as of right this second, and we're going to see what direction these guys are headed in a little bit later. Billy Gunn on commentary for this one, JR suggests that the Road Dogg and Billy Gunn be referred to as the New Age Outlaws, given their behavior. And Billy Gunn kind of likes it. What do you know there? History in the making. Early on this episode of Raw. Gunn gets in a few cheap shots on Dude, but eventually they're playing up the story that Dude Love is morphing into using Mankind moves like the Mandible Claw and others. So you've kind of got this metamorphosis they're pushing with Mick Foley going from Dude Love to Mankind and so forth. Dude hits the double arm DDT for the win here. Gunn tries to go after him with a chair. After the match, they brawl up the ramp. Dog joins the mix. So you've got Road Dogg and Billy Gunn suplexing Dude on the stage as the crowd chants for LOD. LOD's like, the hell, we don't care about this. We're not coming out. Gunn hits a DDT on Dude, and then they shove a referee into Dude Love as he flies off the stage through a table. There's no padding down there. So he sort of overshot the table here a little bit, so his hip just kind of goes right into the concrete floor. And we've seen Mick Foley take a lot of big bumps, as we know, during his career, but this just looked like one that was just very uncomfortable because he did kind of overshoot the table just a little bit, and the hip didn't really get much of the table. It got much more of the concrete floor. Road Dogg and Billy Gunn beat him down some more, so they leave him laying, and sounds like to me, Dude Love is not only going to need a metamorphosis, but he may need some help in his fight against the newly formed New Age Outlaws. All right, the next match is the official debut on Raw of Mark Henry. So very notable episode here. We're far from finished on this. This is his Raw debut. JR lets us know, and this is what I really like about what they did, not only on this show, but really throughout this era, and why I think it was so effective. JR lets us know that Austin has now requested that a WWF cameraman follow him. So what's Austin up to? Meanwhile, this is all about Mark Henry. He squashes the Brooklyn Brawler here for the squash victory. 1-0 for the strongman, that is Mark Henry. All right, we get a video package. Highlights of Owen Hart attacking Shawn Michaels at In Your House, and then again on last week's Raw. So that, of course, playing off of what happened at Survivor Series 97. In the ring, we have made it into the War Zone hour. Remember, this is when they were splitting between the first hour and the second hour. And that means Jim Cornette is joining commentary here. Vince McMahon comes out, and he says that Owen Hart has been endangering the ringside fans with his recent actions. Vince says Owen is under contract, so therefore he must appear in the ring. Here comes Owen through the crowd, and Vince wants to know what this is all about. Owen says he doesn't owe Vince a damn thing, and he's tired of apologizing. Owen says Bret Hart, Jim Neidhart, and British Bulldog did what they had to do, and he's going to do what he has to do in the WWF. So making it very clear that Owen is not leaving here, and that was clearly one of the biggest focuses of this entire promo segment. Owen says no one will run him out of the company. Vince turns this into a story about the WWF title, saying this is what it's all about, right, Owen? It's about the championship and all this other stuff. And Owen says, how stupid are you? Owen says this is about real life and his reputation. Owen is going to make things hard on Shawn Michaels, and he's going to finish things between them. Then Vince brings out the security and says that Owen will enter like a WWF superstar next week instead of entering from the crowd and endangering the audience. Owen then grabs Vince by the collar and shoves him. This was a great segment. I really thought this was fantastic, and if this is to be kind of that point that everyone looks back on and says this is when the Attitude Era began, this is one of those things, and Owen said it himself. This isn't about the WWF title. It's about real life and the reputation of Owen Hart, given what happened at Survivor Series. So they're really leaning into that realism here, and you got to think. I mean, this is something I've always thought about. Think about the spot that Owen Hart is in at this point, this fresh after everything that happened. And so it is just remarkable that they were able to do something here and make it work. And it was a great segment, really great segment. I thought with Owen really playing up the realism of this whole thing and not backing down from Vince, and that's why eventually this would work so well when it came to the Attitude Era. So, all right, video package. You can call 1-900-RUMBLE-98 to win Stone Cold Steve Austin's truck. If you are the person who won Stone Cold Steve Austin's truck at the Royal Rumble in 1998, please let us know in the comments. The video here with highlights of Mark Marrow demanding that Sable on last week's Raw wear a potato sack around her. She eventually removed it, and if you were a teenager at the time, you will not forget it because it was a visual that was seen, and it was the talk of that Raw. So that's all I'll say. All right, Tom Brandi versus the Sultan, who's accompanied by the Iron Sheik here. Cornette kind of talking up Tom Brandi's athleticism. Of course, Brandi was the person in the ring when Sable derobed from the sack last week on Raw. I don't know if the athleticism is going to matter a whole lot in this match because the Sultan uses his strength to control the action here. JR updates us that Austin is now on a bridge, so there's a development. And the signal should be coming in for the next segment, so that's notable here too. Sheik gets on the apron to distract Sultan, but Brandi moves. Sultan runs into him. Brandi rolls up the Sultan for the win. Marrow then attacks Brandi after the match, and the crowd wants them some Sable. They're all about Sable here, chanting her name, but there is no Sable, much to their disappointment. So continuing the feud here between Mero and Tom Brandi, which, like I said, was kind of set up last week with the whole Sable thing on Raw. All right, in the ring, here comes The Rock and the Nation of Domination. They're back. The 1 hour is up for Stone Cold. So we get another highlight package of the events leading to this, which was Austin telling Vince that he's not going to wrestle The Rock, given what he had already done. And then he eventually knocks Vince off the apron after this whole exchange. Vince wants to hit Austin with the chair, but we've got officials between them. So, as we said, everything was already in motion for Austin and Vince, but this is kind of the defining part here, I guess you could say, of the era to get it started. So, Rock says, Austin, again, time's up. They're coming to get the title. Then we cut to the Titantron, and Austin is indeed on that bridge. And then, of course, Austin throws a variety of things in the river, including a pager and then the Intercontinental title belt. The Rock's eyes tell the story of where things are at in this rivalry. What a reaction from The Rock here. So, yes, this is the famous segment where Stone Cold takes the Intercontinental title, throws it off the bridge into the Oyster River, and that will heat things up between these two moving forward. So, a segment, again, that is really replayed a lot. One of the most memorable segments probably of this era, and it happened on this edition of Raw. All right, speaking of defining moments in an era, we go to the video package, and it is a message from Vince McMahon, who says that the WWF is making a conscious effort to open the creative envelope to entertain the fans in a more contemporary manner. So we are breaking the fourth wall here. Like, Vince is flat out saying, it's time to address this. Here we go. Vince says that they, in the WWF, borrow from Days of Our Lives, MTV music videos, King of the Hill, Seinfeld, and other forms of television entertainment. He says the fans are tired of having their intelligence insulted and the theory of good guys versus bad guys all the time. He also takes a shot at the take your vitamins and say your prayers era of the past, which we know who that's taken aim at here in 1997. Vince then encourages some degree of parental discretion given the difference between the first hour of Raw and then the War Zone in the second hour. And Vince says that the new direction has resulted in a boost in viewership, and he thanks the fans for watching Raw and that it is the cure for the common show. They had that up on the overlay early in the promo. The cure for the common show. That is what they're pushing. So, there is your kickoff for the Attitude Era, clearly in the WWF size. Vince kind of, again, breaking open, like, new ground here in terms of directly addressing the audience and saying, hey, we know that things got a little silly there when it came to the new generation era times, but we are leaning all in on the realism. We are leaning in on pushing the envelope here. And so, yes, this is that promo that, if you remember kind of the background and everything, you'll know it if you see it. And Vince clearly making it obvious that they are going to head in a new direction here. And they already have, and they're going to keep this thing going, perhaps even more. So the Attitude Era begins, if you want to refer to it right there. All right, next match, it's Jose versus Steve Blackman. Jose from Los Boricuas. They were still featured in this era, but Savio and company, they all head to the back for the match, which I guess it's like, all right, head to the back here because they didn't want to watch what was about to happen because it's all Steve Blackman. And, Blackman's still kind of new in the run here at this point in 97. He hits a German suplex. Commentary's kind of pushing him, and that'll do it for Steve Blackman getting an easy win here for this one. All right, backstage, Shawn Michaels says that he's not hard to find. If Owen wants him, then he decides, with him and Triple H, who's going to get the shot at Owen. They even suggest China may have an opportunity, but it's not going to happen because they do rock, paper, scissors, and Triple H wins, so he's going to be the person, Hunter Hearst Helmsley, who gets Owen, and perhaps Shawn Michaels will have other business to take care of, knowing he will face The Undertaker at the Royal Rumble. All right, another video here. It's the laser tag slam of the week. The laser tag slam of the week. The Undertaker hitting the choke slam on the Sultan, and that leads us into our main event, which is the Generation X, Shawn Michaels and Hunter Hearst Helmsley with Chyna versus the Legion of Doom. Quite a match here on paper. The crowd loves them some LOD in this one. And Hawk and Animal bounce Michaels around for a bit. Then we get some shenanigans from the heels to allow them to gain the advantage. There is a sign in the crowd. Here we go. That says, the WWF eats the NWO raw. You got a lot of keywords in there. Google would appreciate that. But that is certainly a phrase that is raw and full of attitude. So exactly what Vince was looking for, perhaps. Meanwhile, Road Dogg and Billy Gunn, they hit ringside, and they try to choke out Hawk. They've got some kind of foreign substance on a cloth here. Chyna gets in the ring, and she low blows Animal for the DQ finish. Chyna then hammers Animal with the title. Then Billy Gunn shaves Hawk's mohawk, and Michaels wants them all to do something to Animal. They team up and then powerbomb Animal through the announce table. And then Billy Gunn flies off the top with a leg drop on Hawk. Michaels hits a flying elbow, and the four men kind of interact here. Michaels, Helmsley, Road Dogg, and Billy Gunn, all kind of making it clear that they want the titles. They all want the tag titles. So Road Dogg and Billy Gunn leave, and that's when we get the closing visual here of Shawn Michaels staring at them as they walk away to the back. And you can see Shawn Michaels saying, "Not bad," as they head to the back, and him kind of deep in thought here, perhaps about what is to come with the relationship between Michaels, Road Dogg, Billy Gunn, and Hunter Hearst Helmsley. So, a little tease there to finish off the episode, and that is this particular episode, the December 15th, 1997 edition of WWF Raw. Recommended matches on this show. I think, this was an era where I always like doing the recommended matches, but I'll tell you, when we review these Raw and SmackDowns, in different eras, especially Raw during this era, eventually SmackDown would have some pretty good stuff as we get later into the Attitude Era. But, yeah, this wasn't exactly the time where the matches were the biggest thing. So we're going to more so make this like the recommended segments, if we're going to tie that in. Clearly the stuff between The Rock and Stone Cold, where Austin's throwing the title out, into the river, that's a must-see segment. I thought the Vince and Owen Hart exchange was excellent. I mentioned all the reasons for that. I'd put that in there. And also, you have to watch Vince's promo on the WWF's new vision here moving forward. Like, that's something notable. And I do think if you're going to pick one match, the main event is worth watching just to see some good interaction between clearly defined heels and clearly defined baby faces here, despite what Vince says. But even though the crowd still liked Michaels and Triple H here at this point, but you get a little exchange there. It is a notable one because of the storyline it's going to eventually develop with Road Dogg and Billy Gunn. The MVP of this show, I'm going to give it to Stone Cold Steve Austin. I just thought that, that's probably going to happen a lot as we go through these, series here on the Attitude Era Rewind on the channel, because it's Stone Cold. And, the guy just, he had something different. I'd say Austin and The Rock are your MVPs on this show, but I'll give it to Austin. Overall thoughts. Is this worth watching? Absolutely, because there was lots of attitude on this edition of Raw. So Vince's promo was on point here. And I think if you do want to say that this is the beginning of the Attitude Era, you have to watch just to be able to see some of the things that are set in motion here. And yes, it's nice to have the context, too, of what happened before, but this really does feel like, hey, we are amping things up a bit, and they had already established that tone a little bit before this show, but like I said, things like the Austin Rock exchange, Owens kind of, promo, the usual DX shenanigans, again, you had the New Age Outlaws named on this show. It really added a bit of a different buzz to the company's creative strategy right now, and so this type of episode, to me, was one of the reasons why the Attitude Era was such a success, because you had a lot of things built in, and, the running theme of what is Austin up to all night, that keeps people staying there, which at that point, how important the minute-to-minute, hour, segment-to-segment, quarter-by-quarter, how important that was when you're in this battle with WCW. So, I thought this was a really good edition of Raw. So, yeah, I would recommend this one. All right, there you go. Some thoughts on what may or may not, depending on how you look at it, be the start of the Attitude Era for the December 15th, 1997 edition of WWF Raw. If you guys have watched this recently, or if you have some memories of this show, let me know your thoughts on what stood out with this episode of WWF Raw. Hit that subscribe button, hit the like button. Lots of stuff here at Rewind Wrestling as we do hit play on wrestling's past in the Golden Era, the New Generation Era, the Attitude Era, and the Ruthless Aggression Era, and maybe even more eras to come as we get into it and have a stroll down memory lane in professional wrestling. Let me know your thoughts on this edition of WWF Raw for December 15th, 1997, the official start, maybe, of the Attitude Era.